wasn't going to record this. I sat down 3 times this week and turned the camera off before saying a single word. I don't know why today feels different. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'll turn it off again. But I'm going to try.
My name is Margaret Ellen Holt. I'm 73 years old, and I live alone now in the same house I've lived in for 41 years. The kids are grown. My husband Gerald passed 4 years ago this November, and lately I've been waking up at 2, sometimes 3 in the morning, not from pain or bad dreams, just awake, lying there with the kind of quiet that makes you think. I've been thinking about my life, not in a sad way exactly, more like how you go through an old drawer and find things you forgot you kept, things that make you stop and just hold them for a minute. I want to talk about some of those things. Not because I think I have something important to say. I'm not a wise woman. I never was. I was a school librarian for 31 years. I raised 2 children. I made a lot of casseroles. I worried about the wrong things for most of my adult life. That last part is what I keep coming back to. When I was in my late 30s, Gerald and I went through a hard stretch. Not anything dramatic, no affair, no crisis you could point to, just distance, the kind that grows slowly when 2 people are both exhausted and neither one says anything about it. I remember a Sunday afternoon. The children were at my mother's. The house was quiet. Gerald was in the backyard, just sitting in that old green lawn chair he refused to throw away, and I stood at the kitchen window looking at him for a long time. I thought about going outside. I didn't. I told myself he wanted to be alone. I told myself I had things to do. I told myself there would be other Sundays. There were other Sundays, 30 more of them. But I never forgot that one. I never forgot choosing the dishes over the lawn chair. That's the kind of thing I want to talk about, not the big mistakes. The big mistakes are obvious. You know them when you make them. You feel them immediately. It's the small ones that take decades to understand. The ones that didn't feel like mistakes at all in the moment. The ones that felt like being responsible or practical or mature. The ones that everyone around you would have called sensible. Those are the ones that sit with you at 3 in the morning. I grew up being told that love was something you proved through work, through sacrifice, through staying and enduring. My mother never once said, "I love you" out loud to me. Not because she didn't, I know she did, but because in her world, love was the pot of soup when you were sick. It was the iron dress on Easter morning. It was everything except the words. So I learned to speak that language. I showed up, I did the work, I stayed. And I genuinely believed for most of my life that showing up was enough, that presence was the same as connection, that love didn't need to be spoken because it was being lived. Gerald knew I loved him, of course he did, but there were things I never said to him, things I thought so clearly, felt so deeply, and just kept. About a year before he died, he was in the hospital for his heart. Nothing immediately life-threatening, they said. A few days of monitoring, some adjustments. I slept in the chair beside his bed the first 2 nights because I couldn't leave. On the second night, around midnight, he was awake and I was awake, and neither of us said anything for a long time. Then he turned his head and looked at me and said, "You never told me you were my favorite person." I laughed a little. I said, "Gerald, you know that." He smiled. He said, "I know, but I would have liked to hear it." He waited 30-some years for me to just say the obvious thing. I don't know when I became someone who kept everything inside. I think it happened the way most things happen, gradually, without a decision, just a slow closing of a door until one day you look and the door is shut and you can't quite remember when. I was not a cold woman, I want to be clear about that. My children would tell me I was warm. My colleagues would say I was kind, and I was. I am. But there's a difference between being warm and being open, between being kind and being known. I was warm, I was kind, I was not often known.
My daughter's name is Claire. She's 44 now. She lives in Portland with her husband and their 2 boys. We talk every Sunday, and I love those calls. But for most of her life, her teenage years, her 20s, even her early 30s, there was something between us. Not a fight, not a wound either of us could name, just a gap. I know now that the gap was mine. I made it without meaning to. When Claire was 17, she wanted to take a year off before university. She had this idea of going to work on a farm in the south of France through some exchange program she'd read about. She was passionate about it in a way she wasn't passionate about many things, and I remember the light in her face when she talked about it. Gerald was open to it. He said, "Let her go, Maggie." I said no. I had reasons, real reasons, I thought. The cost, the safety, the interruption to her studies, practical reasons, responsible reasons. She went to university that fall. She did fine. She has a good life. But she brought up the France thing once, years later, lightly, almost as a joke. She said, "I probably would have just eaten cheese and learned nothing." And we both laughed. But I heard something underneath the lightness, and I thought about it ever since. I didn't say no because of the money or the safety, not really. I said no because I was afraid of her leaving, because something in me couldn't stand the idea of her being that far away, that free, and maybe finding out she didn't need to come back. And I dressed that fear up in practicality and handed it to her as a decision. She accepted it because she was 17 and I was her mother, and that's what you do. I have wondered, more times than I can count, who she might have been if I had just said yes. I'm not saying any of this to punish myself. I've done enough of that. There was a period in my 60s when I would go back through my life like it was a trail of evidence and compile everything I'd done wrong, every closed door, every held tongue, every fearful no. It wasn't useful. It just made me feel old in a way that had nothing to do with my body. What I'm trying to do now is just look at it clearly, without flinching, but also without drama. Just see it for what it was. I was a woman who was loved and who loved back, but who spent most of her life one step removed from the full weight of it, watching it through glass almost, present and not quite present at the same time. And the strange thing is, and this is the part that took me the longest to understand, I thought that distance was maturity. I thought keeping myself composed, keeping things running, not falling apart, not needing too much from anyone, I thought that was what a good woman did. My mother had taught me that too. Stay standing, don't be a burden. So I stayed standing. For 50 years I stayed standing. And somewhere in there I forgot that you're also allowed to sit down, to lean, to say, "I need something." Gerald asked me once, near the end, he was tired a lot by then, and we talked differently in that tiredness, more honestly. He asked me if I was happy, not had I been happy, was I, present tense. I said yes, of course. He looked at me for a moment. He said, "I mean really, Maggie." And I didn't know what to say, because the truth was complicated. The truth was that I had had a life full of love, and I had spent most of it slightly guarded against it, and I didn't know how to explain that in a way that wouldn't sound ungrateful. So I just said yes again, and held his hand, and we sat in the quiet together. I think he understood. I think Gerald always understood more than I gave him voice to. That's another thing I kept. My son David is 41. He's quieter than Claire, more careful with words. He has my nature, poor thing. I see it in him, the same composure, the same slight distance, the same ability to be in a room and somehow not entirely in it. I've wanted to say something to him about it, not as advice, just as recognition, just as a way of saying, I see you and I know what that costs. I haven't yet. I don't know if I will. Some things you understand too late to change anything, and the most honest thing you can do is just sit with that. I think about time differently now, not with panic, that passed a few years ago, more with a kind of clear-eyed accounting. I understand now that time is not something you manage, it's something that passes regardless, and what you do with that passing is not about productivity or legacy or any of those words people use. It's just about whether you were actually there, whether you let the people who mattered feel like they mattered, whether you let yourself feel things without immediately smoothing them over, whether you said the things you meant while there was still time to say them, instead of saving them for some later that never quite arrived. I saved so much. I was such a careful keeper of things unsaid. There's a photograph on my mantel. It was taken at Claire's wedding, 12 years ago now. Gerald is in it, and both the children and me. We're all laughing at something, I can't remember what. And we look in that photograph like a family without any gaps, like people who have always known how to be close. And we were a family, a real one, with love in it. But I know what's not in the photograph. I know the 1,000 quiet moments where I stood at a window and didn't go outside. I know the words I kept. I know the year in France that never happened. I'm not saying the photograph is a lie. I'm saying it's a photograph, and the life was richer and more complicated and more tender and more missed than any photograph can hold. I still wake up at 3 in the morning sometimes. I lie there in the quiet of this house and I let myself think, not to fix anything. It's too late to fix anything. Just to see it. Just to finally, honestly see it. If there's something I wish I had understood earlier, and I'm not saying this to anyone in particular, only because it's true, it's just that being present is not the same as showing up, that love is not a thing you prove through endurance, that the people who matter most to you probably already know you love them, but they might still be waiting for you to say it out loud, to let them see you want them there, to stop keeping yourself so carefully together all the time. I was so careful for so long, and Gerald loved me anyway. Claire and David love me still. I just wish I had let that in a little sooner. I wish I had spent less time standing and more time sitting in the grass, less time being responsible for everything, and more time just being there, in it, undignified and close and willing to need. That's all I wanted to say, I think. It's enough for today. If something here felt familiar to you, if you recognized yourself in any of it, I don't have anything to tell you to do about that. I'm just an old woman sitting in a quiet house saying what I finally see. Maybe that's worth something. Maybe it isn't. Either way, thank you for staying with me till the end.